Welcome to Piano Shack with me, Woody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Over here we have the YAMAHA GENOS 2. I've had it for about 4 or 5 weeks and I think it's time I gave you a 1-month review. Full disclosure, I want you to keep in mind that I do have friends at Yamaha and this is on loan to me for a couple of months. So I want you to know that, but I will be sharing my thoughts on the positives and some of the things that I feel could be improved. Yeah, I thought it would be nice to grow my hair out, but it's a bit of a disaster, so. So I've done a number of videos already on this, maybe 4 or 5, and they've been all quite popular. We did a vlog from Berlin, behind the scenes at the launch event, a presentation of all the new features, demonstrations of the new features. I have done a tutorial, how to get started playing this. We've done a discussion all about if this sounds cheesy or not, which I released today, and that one is doing quite well as well. And of course, some song performances, which aren't doing all that great in terms of views and stuff, which is probably what you would expect. So for making all of these videos and song performances, I've gone in pretty deep on this instrument and even reached some limitations, which I'll be sharing with you throughout the video. Okay, we'll start with the sounds. I have not exactly gone through all the sounds and browsed and auditioned them. I've just been hearing what the sounds that have been included in the styles or what Yamaha have programmed into the one-touch settings. All of them have been excellent, with a few exceptions, which I'll touch on in a minute. But generally, the acoustic sounds, the guitars, the saxophones, the strings, woodwinds, brass and so on, the very best I've heard in any keyboard, period. They're absolutely stunning. The pianos and the new pianos are fantastic as well. But where this perhaps falls a little bit short, before we get there, the synthesizer sounds are really nice as well. They're not quite as cutting edge or sophisticated as you get in something like the Modi X, which has that fabulous, the stepped LFO, I forget what they call it, but that can give you some really nice contemporary sounds, which are not quite available here, but the synth sounds are really good, especially if you're more into the retro kind of synthesizer sounds. And remember, of course, you can't do very much sound editing on here. It's basically a preset machine. You can adjust the filter, cutoff and the resonance and the attack and the release, but that's it. Fortunately, there are thousands of sounds on board, so you can usually find one that comes close to what you're wanting and then just tweak it a little bit. For me, actually, not an issue. I don't like to spend too much time making my own sounds anyway. I'd rather just be playing. The weakest sounds, in my opinion, are the Fender Rhodes electric pianos, the Wurlitzers and the Hammond organ, which is a huge shame because they are really important to me. And for a keyboard, this price, you really want everything top notch in the one instrument. But for me, they fall a little bit short. Let's just say they're not up to the standard of the Fender Rhodes, Worley and Hammond organ sounds in the flagship YC, and not even the CK series that we recently reviewed, or even the Reface. I think they are a step above this. But I'm really picky about those sounds, and I get the feeling that the demographics, the target audience for these kind of instruments probably doesn't care so much about tone wheel organ sounds or vintage electric pianos, which is a shame, but perhaps that's something that Yamaha could improve in a firmware update or with a free expansion, perhaps. Please? I mean, they're not terrible, they sound great in the mix as you're playing along with these styles, but in isolation as a solo instrument, I felt they were a little bit lacking. Okay, for the styles, they are all wonderful. Many new styles on this, which we'll talk about in a second. There are 800 styles. I've played through maybe about 200 of them so far, but I've also downloaded free expansion packs from Yamaha. There are about 20 expansion packs you can download that were made for the Genos 1, but have now been converted for the Genos 2. And each of those packs has maybe 20 styles. So that's another 400 styles or something for a combined 1,200 styles. And let me tell you, they all do sound, well, most of them do sound very good. Some of the styles you and I may never use. The thing about keyboards like this, they have to cram in every possible music genre under the sun because someone inevitably will want to play that style. So out of those 1,200, 800 plus the 400 expansions, there's probably only a couple of hundred that you might actually use. And then we have, on this one in particular, a lot of new styles that are very, very song specific, customized to do or trying to replicate a particular song. For example, we have Don't You Want Me Baby, The Human League, Pet Shop Boys stuff. I've heard Madonna songs in here, Whitney Houston, a lot of 80s stuff actually, which is a lot of fun in the sounds I've explored so far. But are they all that useful? Personally, I prefer generic styles, which you could use for any number of songs. But what are you going to do with, for example, a Karma Chameleon style, unless you want to play that exact song? And talking of expansions, the two that really stood out, that were excellent, were Vintage Keys and Vintage Synth. And these expansion packs have extra voices, sounds in Yamaha terminology, and the styles, of course. And there were some real gems in there, stuff like Oxygen from Jean-Michel Jarre I stumbled across. Yeah, a lot of fun to play. I've experimented with the audio recorder and the MIDI recorder that are built in, and both of those work really good. To my surprise, I normally avoid them like the plague. But in this case, they work really well, and I could actually use those instead of using my portable digital audio recorder or connecting it to the computer. Yeah, one thing I noticed was that you can start the audio recorder going and then even change presets, registrations, styles and everything, and it would allow you to do that and keep recording. Many other synths I've owned in the past would refuse to let you operate the panel controls whilst they were recording. So excellent job on this one. It just runs in the background. I don't think there's any kind of pattern-based recorder. You just have to do long song recorder, either an entire arrangement in one go, or you can do a multi-track composition, but it's one track of a song at a time. There's no way to create patterns and then chain them together, which is a shame. Wow, the MIDI implementation on this thing is pretty confusing. I had the idea of, instead of capturing the audio whilst I'm doing my song performances, I could capture the MIDI, giving me the possibility to edit it, yes, cheat a little bit, and then play the MIDI back through the keyboard. And that was very challenging. This thing has several different MIDI templates to represent different ways of transmitting and receiving MIDI. Also, it has 2 pairs of MIDI ports. That's right, 2 MIDI ins, 2 MIDI outs. Yeah, it got very complicated, but what I learned was that to get the best results, it's important to transmit on the MIDI port A and then receive on the MIDI port B. Remember, there's 2 ports, and that seemed to work quite well. One thing that really surprised me is that this spits out MIDI data for all of the accompaniment tracks. That's right, the drums, the bass, the chords, everything is just sent over to your DAW, which is pretty mind-boggling. That means that if you wanted to, you could go in and edit the notes being played by the styles or mute parts in your DAW, which I thought was pretty awesome. I wasn't expecting that. I was just expecting it to capture the notes that you're playing on the keyboard, but no, it transmits all of the style data as MIDI. Pretty awesome. We have these multipads. I demonstrated those in my tutorial. You can trigger a little loop or a one-shot sample, like a sound effect or a cymbal crash. Really nice idea that I think has a lot of potential, but the way it's implemented right now, I don't think it fully lives up to my expectations anyway. For example, if you import a drum loop, perhaps you have a native instruments expansion with some really fresh house drum beats or something, put it into here, it kind of works, but it's hard to synchronize it with the track, and there's no concept of time stretching. It doesn't adjust the length of the sample to fit in with whichever tempo you have selected, which is a real shame. That's something we come to expect in this day and age, I think. Another thing I noticed when going deep on the multipad editing, yes, you can create your own multipads, your own phrases, arpeggios or licks. You can do that on board, but it was a frustrating experience. It didn't seem to be fully fleshed out, to be honest. And there was no way, for example, to set different effects for each multipad that I could find. That all seems to be hidden away somewhere, or not even possible. What I wanted to achieve, I was doing a cover of Chariots of Fire, which has the clap sound with the reverb and the delay. So I recorded that onto a multipad, but there was no way for me to adjust the effects that I could see, or even adjust the relative volumes of the multipads. So perhaps that's something we can hope for in a firmware update, but I gather it's been this way for decades. One feature here that is brilliantly implemented and an absolute godsend is the registration buttons. These are the 10 buttons here that you can use to store front panel configurations. And once I got to grips with how to really use these to their best advantage, it was truly amazing, a game changer. And I wonder why synthesizers don't have such a friendly way of saving configurations. Let me explain. So I thought a registration was like just a preset really for a song, but it's much more than that. You can store so much information in a registration memory, and then you can store banks of these registration memories, and there are 10 buttons here underneath the display where you can press a button to jump between the registrations. And in one of these, you can store the tempo, of course, which style, which sounds, voices you have chosen to play, but also the status of the instrument parts, if the accompaniment parts are muted, if you've muted the drums, for example, the mix, the volumes of all the different instruments. You can even store the transposition settings, the effects, and so on and so on and so on. Everything. It's just a snapshot of the entire instrument. And what I've done for my performances was store one snapshot for the introduction, and I'll press a button and it will lead into the verse with all of the settings for the verse, chorus, and so on. And in fact, for many of my performances, I've used all 10 of the registration slots on the front panel there for just different slight variations in the sound and the mix of the accompaniment. Really amazing. And yeah, I wish more synthesizers had such friendly, real-time performance controls like that. When I'm doing my performances, people were asking me, how are you changing the sounds without actually pressing any buttons? And the trick is there, I'm using another feature here, really well thought out, called the registration sequence. You use a foot pedal and it just steps up through the 10 registrations on the front panel there without you having to use your hands. You can even program fills as you go from one registration preset to the next. It's just so nice. And we have an amazing auto power off feature as well, which never comes in handy. In my experience, many of the new features that Yamaha have hyped here, the ambient drums and the style dynamic controls, I haven't found myself using a lot in my performances. I'll call up whatever Yamaha have programmed into the style, and that generally works fine for me. So I am getting some advantage from these new features, but it's not something I find myself adjusting, definitely not during a performance. In fact, for the style dynamics feature, this allows you to have the band, the accompaniment, play more softly or more hard. That doesn't seem to be the best word for it, but I can't think of anything else. That's really nice, but it's quite a subtle effect. You have to really listen out for it. I wish that Yamaha had taken it a little bit further actually and had the dynamics go all the way down to whisper quiet, whisper softly, from PPP to FFF. Right now it feels like it goes from mezzo forte to forte. Oh, look at me with my grade 5 classical piano theory knowledge. We have the new reverb on this as well, which I never find myself adjusting, but is there on all of the styles and sounds, and it does sound really excellent. Okay, I've also experimented with the audio and MIDI over USB, which works flawlessly. Didn't have an issue. One thing I will mention, a bit of a disappointment here, is that when you use USB to send audio to your PC, it's only stereo 2-channel. And this has many different instrument parts in the accompaniments. It would have been lovely to have been able to send those over to your DAW as multi-tracks, but you can't do that. It just sends a stereo mix from the instrument, which means you can't really do any editing or mixing in your DAW, which would have been really nice. So that's a shame. That's a feature that the Modi X has, for example, which costs a lot less than this. It's got Bluetooth as well, which I use a lot actually. If I'm ever jamming along and learning a song, I'll have it playing on my phone, connected by Bluetooth, and the sound comes out the speakers or my headphones. It's excellent, super convenient, works really well. The Keybed here is phenomenal, one of the very best I've ever played in a synth action keyboard. It's not weighted, it's no hammer action or anything like this, but it's a very high quality synth action, exactly the same as you get in the new Montage M and the Motif keyboards going back. So exactly the same kind of feel and quality as that. Yeah, really nice to play on. Yeah, very nice. Nice key action all the way to the back of the keys. The keyboard also has aftertouch, and they've fine-tuned the curve of the aftertouch, and I find it works really well if you want to, for example, trigger vibrato on a saxophone sound. It's something that I think seems to come quite naturally to me. It's really nice. What I don't love quite so much is that the entire construction here is made of plastic. There's been a lot of comments to that effect as well. For an instrument costing this kind of money, it would have been nice to have a more premium professional metal enclosure. It doesn't have to be heavy. Nord have proven that you can make metal enclosures with aluminium that are very sturdy, rugged and still lightweight. So that's something that I would have appreciated for a more luxurious feel. It's got the two screens. The main screen still feels like this slightly older screen technology, but it's nice and large, and in practice it works really well, so there's nothing too much to complain about there really. And I do like the fact that they haven't crammed too much information into the main display. The fonts are fairly large, it's a nice friendly layout, and it never feels intimidating. If only flagship synthesizer workstations could follow the same trick. Follow the same lead, I think is a better way to put it. But generally, the ease of use and the friendliness of the operating system here is so refreshing. I've never really got stuck or struggled to understand anything. It's all so intuitive. And I can't say the same about the flagship workstation synthesizers from Yamaha or any other company for that matter. I end up often getting frustrated and almost tearing my hair out, which might not be a bad thing, perhaps. We've got the knobs and the faders now that are illuminated with LED rings, collars and the LED strips, which is really nice to see at a glance what the current instrument settings are. You can easily see if a part is muted or not. I don't find myself adjusting the faders and the knobs all that much. I tend to just go right in on the touchscreen. And I think one reason for that may be that they have implemented this catch mode now. So if you want to adjust one of the values here on the faders, for example, I'm doing it now, you first need to push the fader all the way up to catch the current value. Only then can you manipulate it, and that feels a little bit awkward to me. It's a lot of wiggling up and down just to change the value of a parameter. Perhaps we could have that optional in a firmware update. You can either have catch or jump modes. A lot of synthesizers offer that. Okay, we have to talk about this. It's been a theme in the comments. I'm sure you're aware of this. People have been quite upset, angry about the price of this, which I understand to some extent. It's perhaps a little bit disappointing to get that level of sticker shock if this is a keyboard you were hoping to buy, and then you see that it's going to cost you between $5,000 and $6,000 US dollars. And it's a shame it has to be that expensive, because if it was more affordable, then that would mean more people could get their hands on these and really enjoy them. Now, by far the biggest drawback that I have to mention, because I want to be as honest with you as I possibly can, the biggest drawback is the seamless sound transitions, or lack thereof. If you don't know, that means that you can change sounds whilst holding down a sound and it won't abruptly cut off. And you can play the new sound whilst holding down and sustaining the old sound. It's a seamless sound transition. This is something that's available on my Modi X, my Nautilus, the Montage, Roland Phantom, and many other premium synths and keyboards, but not here. And this is where I really need it. On the synthesizers, I couldn't care less actually about that feature, but here it's really important. When you are switching between different style variations, perhaps going from the verse to the chorus, the keyboard will automatically, if you want it to, which you normally do, swap out the sounds for you. And if you are holding down a sound in your right hand, say for example a sustained string pad sound, and then you hit variation B, two things can happen. And it depends on how the different layers are set up. But that sound you're holding down will either cut out very abruptly, or it will change to the new sound as you're holding down the chord. It'll just abruptly switch over. And I find that that can ruin a perfectly good performance. Of course, there are workarounds, and you very quickly learn not to hold down a note while you're changing sounds or variations. Just make sure to lift your hand up, then change the variation. So I think that's all the main points I wanted to make. In summary then, although there is some room for improvement in some areas, I think, overall, the sound quality, the samples, the styles, the accompaniments are just top-notch, better than anything else I've ever played in my life. And this is, without doubt, I think it's fair to say, the most fun and the best sounding instrument I've ever had in my house. And if you ask my family, which is the best sounding and most fun instrument and enjoyable keyboard I've ever played for them, this is the one, hands down. Yeah, as I mentioned in my video about the cheese, there is no doubt that these things are hugely fun, rewarding and satisfying to play, and there is no instrument like it for bringing a lot of enjoyment to the audience. So yeah, that about wraps it up. I'll see you in a few months for my final review of this before it has to go back to Yamaha, unless we can thrash out a good deal between us. I don't know. We'll just have to see what else comes into this shack as well between then and now. So yeah, stay tuned. Thank you for watching this. If you did enjoy it and want to see more like this, then remember to subscribe, and thank you if you already have. I'll see you next time. Cheerio!